graders, it's me, Miss Landry, and I'm here today with all of you to read. The book that we will be reading is absolutely magical, and honestly, it's one of my favorites that we read in third grade together. The book I'm going to start reading with all of you is Peter Pan. Now, you may notice that this is a chapter book, which means I can't read the whole thing to you in just one video. So, the third grade teachers and I will be posting videos every so often of a new chapter of the Peter Pan book. That way, you guys all get to enjoy this amazing book, even though we're not in school together. So, let's get started. Peter Pan, Chapter 1, Famous Last Words. Ooh, I wonder what that is. All children grow up, all except one. Wendy learned this when she was playing in the garden one day at the age of 2. She brought her mother a flower, and Miss Darling hugged her and said, "Oh, why can't you stay like this forever and ever?" Before that day, Wendy didn't realize she wouldn't stay the same. Wendy had 2 younger brothers, John and Michael. They were growing too. Mrs. Darling stayed home with the children while Mr. Darling went to work in stocks. His stocks didn't always work for him, however, and so the family had to scrimp and save. They still had a nanny, of course, because all the other families in the neighborhood had one, and Mr. Darling cared very much about keeping up with the neighbors. But the Darlings were poor, and so their nanny was actually just a giant Newfoundland dog named Nana. Oh, that's silly. They have a dog as their nanny who babysits them. Nana was an interesting nanny, to say the least. She didn't believe in all the newfangled talk about germs. Sometimes she would lovingly lick the children right after she licked her own foot. Mr. Darling was ashamed of Nana, and sometimes he was cold to her as a result. He shouldn't have been. She was actually quite a treasure. If the children wandered or dilly-dallied on their way to school, she would bump them with her head to get them back on track. She never once forgot John's soccer uniform, and she usually carried an umbrella in her mouth instead of a bone, just in case of rain. And it did rain quite often in England. So I'll show you. There's a picture. There's Nana with the umbrella in her mouth, if you can see that. All in all, the Darlings were a normal, happy English family. Until, that is, the arrival of a boy named Peter Pan. Ooh, so now we're introduced to our character. Mrs. Darling had never heard of Peter Pan until one day when she was tidying up all her children's minds. What do you think she means by tidying up all the children's minds? We're going to keep reading and maybe we can figure it out. Most good mothers do this after their children are asleep, as if they are drawers and children's memories are underwear and socks that need to be neatly folded and put away. Oh, how Miss Darling would wrinkle her forehead sometimes at the sweetest things she found in her children's minds, wondering where on earth they had picked them up. These things she would lay out and lovingly smooth on the bed for the children to slip on first thing in the morning. Other times, however, she found mean or ugly thoughts in her children's sleepy heads. These she would shake out and quickly hide, like something pushed under the bed. So it sounds like that Miss Darling is going through all the children's thoughts and letting them keep all the happy thoughts while trying to push back the bad thoughts. That way they only had good thoughts to think about. Don't think she's actually going through their clothes, though. I think it's just their minds. Children's minds are a curious place. If someone could draw a map, it would be full of zigzagging lines and squigglies. Eventually, however, all the lines and squiggles would lead to Neverland. What is Neverland, you ask? It is a magical island in the middle of every child's mind. It is a place children go to mainly in their imaginations, unless, of course, they have an invitation and a very special guide. Every child's Neverland is slightly different. Some are in colors, and others are in black and white. Some have ragged coral reefs with tiny smashed up boats, lonely caves, and tiny huts on the beach. Others have hunchbacked little old ladies, turtles laying eggs, or gnomes who like to sew. Others still have scary first days of school, trying not to laugh at church, pub quizzes on grammar that you haven't studied for, money from the tooth fairy, and chocolate pudding. There are no rules to what's in one's Neverland. John's Neverland had a lagoon with flamingos flying over it, while Michael, who tried hard to be like his older brother, had a flamingo with lagoons flying over it. Wendy, meanwhile, had a pet wolf and a boat. So how silly is that? John had a lagoon, which is kind of like a little lake-ish area, with flamingos flying all around. And if you don't know what flamingos are, they're pink birds. And then his little brother, who loved looking up to his older brother, so his little brother Michael, had flamingos that were on the ground with the water floating above the lagoons. And then the older sister Wendy had a pet wolf and a boat. So that's kind of cool. They all have their different things on their Neverland. The island doesn't appear on any map because it never stands still. If you can find it, Neverland is a very fun place to visit during the day when it is sunny. But in the 2 minutes before children go to bed, it becomes scary and full of shadows. That is why night lights were invented. Mrs. Darling didn't know anything about Neverland. Or rather, she did from her own childhood, but she had long since forgotten and was so confused when she bumped into the island in her travels through her children's minds. There were other things that confused her too. For starters, there was the name Peter, which came up again and again in bold letters. And the letters were bolder than any other word in all her children's mind, especially Wendy's. "Who is Peter?" she asked her daughter. "Is he your friend?" "Well," Wendy admitted, "not always." "You know, I don't like you talking to strangers," Mrs. Darling said. "But he isn't a stranger, Mother. Don't you remember him?" "Why, I've never heard of him in my life," Mrs. Darling insisted, but as soon as she said this, she knew it was not quite true. She could not remember meeting Peter, or even knowing him. No, she was too old for that, but in the back of her mind, she recalled a story about a boy who kept children company so that they would not be scared. She was sure that she believed in him when she was Wendy's age. "Well, anyway, even if I did remember him by now, he would be all grown up, just like me," she said, and tucked Wendy in for the night. "I'm worried about this Peter person," Mrs. Darling told her husband later that evening. "Don't be," he said. "It's probably just some nonsense put into their heads by that no-good nanny. It'll all blow over. Wait and see." These are what some are sometimes referred to as famous last words. So that's the end of chapter 1. And what I want all of you to try thinking about is, what would your Neverland look like? So maybe at home, after listening to this, you guys can draw a picture of what your Neverland would have. Does it have magical creatures? Does it have all your friends with you? Does it have your favorite food? So I'm challenging all of you, if you have scrap paper and pencils, crayons, markers, whatever you have, to draw your own Neverland and maybe write a few sentences about it, explaining what your Neverland has and why you decided to have that. But that is all we're reading for today, so I can't wait to read again with you in a few days to read our second chapter called Now Peter Now and see what happens next in our book. So I hope you all have a great night. Bye!